To all of my teammates, to fans of cricket all over the world, and to all Australians who are disappointed and angry. I'm sorry. I'll do everything I can to make up for my mistake and the damage it's caused.
March 24, 2018, Cape Town, South Africa. The third day of the third Test match between Australia and South Africa. The series stands level at 1-1. In the bright South African sunshine, under the shadow of the iconic Table Mountain, a young Australian cricketer reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, bright yellow object. Within moments, this simple act would send shockwaves through the cricketing world.
It's come back a lot. Well, I agree with you, Graham. I just thought the
What happened next would tear apart the reputation of a proud cricketing nation, end careers, trigger a cultural revolution in Australian cricket, and forever change how the game's
charged with attempting to change the condition of the ball. We had a discussion during the break to
gentlemanly image would be perceived. This is the story of cricket's darkest scandal, a tale of ambition, pressure, and the catastrophic decision that brought Australian cricket to its knees. For over 140 years, Test cricket had been played between nations with an unwritten code: play hard, play fair. But on this autumn day in Cape Town, that code would be shattered in full view of millions around the world. The Australian cricket team, once revered for their skill and tenacity, now found themselves at the centre of international disgrace. Their captain, Steve Smith, once compared to the legendary Don Bradman, would soon be weeping before the world's media. How did a team at the pinnacle of world cricket fall so spectacularly? What drives elite athletes to risk everything for a momentary advantage? And can redemption ever truly be found after such a public fall from grace? This is the story of the Sandpaper Scandal, cricket's day of infamy. The build-up to that fateful day in Cape Town had been simmering with tension. Australia had arrived in South Africa on the crest of a wave, having comprehensively beaten England 4-0 in the Ashes. Their aggressive, win-at-all-costs mentality had been celebrated back home, but questions were already being raised about where the line between competitive spirit and unsportsmanlike conduct should be drawn. From the outset, the South African tour had been volatile. In the first test at Durban, Australian vice-captain David Warner had exploded after running out AB de Villiers. Then came an ugly confrontation in the players' stairwell between Warner and South African wicketkeeper Quinton de Kock, where Warner had to be physically restrained by teammates. Australian spinner Nathan Lyon had been fined for dropping the ball near a prone AB de Villiers after a run-out. South African fast bowler Kagiso Rabada had been banned for brushing against Steve Smith's shoulder during a celebration, only to have the ban overturned on appeal. By the time the teams arrived in Cape Town for the third test, the series was level at 1-1.
I would have loved to be playing the next game. I don't know whether I'll be playing or not. But yeah, it's not looking good.
The atmosphere was electric, the stakes enormous. March 24th, the third day of the test. South Africa had taken a narrow first innings lead of 56 runs. As the Proteas began their second innings, Australia desperately needed early wickets. They managed just one before lunch as South Africa steadily built on their advantage. Cricket balls naturally deteriorate through a match, but teams legally try to manage this process to gain an advantage, particularly to achieve reverse swing, where the ball moves unpredictably through the air. It's a delicate science requiring meticulous care of the ball. Shortly after lunch, TV cameras caught Australia's Cameron Bancroft, the least experienced member of the team, rubbing the ball vigorously. Zooming in, the cameras revealed something yellow in his hand. Noticing he was being filmed, Bancroft hastily shoved the object down the front of his trousers. When confronted by the umpires, Bancroft produced a black cloth used for cleaning sunglasses, claiming that was all he had in his pocket. The umpires, seemingly satisfied, allowed play to continue. But the TV broadcasters were not convinced. As described by journalist Jeff Lemon, who was present that day, the super slow motion capture was instead capturing 150 frames a second of a drawstring being tugged, frantically enough to turn the slow version into an incongruously extravagant flourish. A magician's fling of the hand. The magician in his haste proved to have no magic at all, not the slightest hint of sleight of hand in the way he took a bright yellow square from his pocket, thoroughly unpalmed, and pushed its incriminating colour into hiding. Soon, Australia's 12th man, Peter Hanscom, was seen running onto the field with a message. The images of Bancroft's actions had been broadcast on the stadium's big screen. The secret was out. In commentary boxes around the ground, broadcasters and former players watched in disbelief as the footage was replayed again and again. The evidence was damning and incontrovertible. As the day's play concluded, the cricketing world waited for an explanation. It would come in one of the most extraordinary press conferences in sporting history. With shoulders slumped and faces ashen, Captain Steve Smith and Cameron Bancroft faced the media. Bancroft admitted to tampering with the ball, but claimed he had used adhesive tape with dirt attached. Smith, meanwhile, made the shocking admission that this wasn't a rogue action, but a deliberate plan conceived by the team's leadership group during the lunch break. "I won't consider stepping down," Smith stated defiantly. "I still think I am the right person for the job." But as Australia slept, the world reacted with furious condemnation. By morning, it would become clear that this was far more than a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a crisis that would engulf Australian cricket. As dawn broke in Australia on March 25, 2018, Australians woke to discover their national team, and by extension, their country, had become international pariahs. The story dominated front pages and broadcasts not just in cricket-playing nations, but worldwide. Even Australia's Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, weighed in, "It is a shocking disappointment. It's wrong, and I look forward to Cricket Australia taking decisive action soon." The reaction was swift and unforgiving. Cricket Australia immediately stood down Smith and Warner as captain and vice-captain for the remainder of the Test match, with wicket-keeper Tim Paine taking over as captain. But this was only the beginning. For a sports-mad nation that prided itself on playing hard but fair, the revelation that their team had been caught cheating was nothing short of traumatic. The Australian public's reaction mixed anger, disappointment, and deep embarrassment. The fallout wasn't limited to cricket circles. Major sponsors threatened to pull their support. The Australian Sports Commission called for Smith to be removed as captain, and former players expressed their shock and dismay. Cricket Australia CEO James Sutherland flew to South Africa as the governing body launched its own investigation. Meanwhile, the International Cricket Council, ICC, handed down its initial sanctions. Smith was suspended for one Test match and fined 100% of his match fee, while Bancroft received 3 demerit points and lost 75% of his match fee. For many, these penalties seemed insufficient given the gravity of the offence. The pressure on Cricket Australia to take stronger action intensified by the hour. On the field, a shell-shocked Australian team capitulated to a crushing 322-run defeat on the 4th day of the Cape Town Test. But their sporting humiliation was nothing compared to what awaited them. Cricket Australia's investigation soon revealed that the object used wasn't tape as initially claimed, but sandpaper specifically brought onto the field to tamper with the ball. The premeditation made the offence even more serious. The verdict came down like a hammer blow. Smith, Warner and Bancroft would be sent home immediately, separate from the rest of the team. The 4th Test would proceed without them, with a depleted Australian squad left to salvage whatever dignity remained. For Smith and Warner, architects of Australia's recent successes, the journey home would be the longest of their lives. For Cameron Bancroft, a young player trying to establish himself in international cricket, it was a catastrophic turn in a promising career that had barely begun. As their plane took off from Johannesburg, none of them could have predicted the scale of what awaited them back in Australia, nor how long and difficult the road to redemption would be. The scenes at Australian airports as the disgraced cricketers returned home were unprecedented. Media packs swarmed terminals in Sydney and Perth. Television helicopters tracked cars from above, and security guards formed protective cordons around shell-shocked players. Steve Smith, the fallen captain, faced the cameras in Sydney. His voice cracking and tears flowing, Smith delivered one of the most raw and painful public apologies ever seen in Australian sport. I want to make it clear that as captain of the Australian cricket team, I take full responsibility. I made a serious error of judgment, and I now understand the consequences. I'll do everything I can to make up for my mistake and the damage it's caused.
I'm sorry. I'll do everything I can to make up for my mistake and the damage it's caused.
If any good can come of this, if there can be a lesson to others, then I hope I can be a force for change. His heartbroken father stood behind him, arm around his distraught mother. David Warner's press conference was similarly emotional, but more carefully controlled. He apologised, but deflected specific questions about who knew what and when. His wife Candice, who had been cruelly targeted by South African fans earlier in the tour, stood by his side, her own eyes filled with tears. In Perth, Bancroft faced the music alone, apologising to all Australians. "I have let many people down. I have let down my teammates, our supporters, and the game of cricket itself." The spectacle of these elite athletes reduced to tears shocked even those calling for harsh punishments. But Cricket Australia was unmoved. Their sanctions would be unprecedented in severity. Cricket Australia's verdict was damning. Steve Smith, 12-month ban from all international and domestic cricket, and banned from captaincy for an additional 12 months after his return. David Warner, 12-month ban from all international and domestic cricket, and banned from any leadership position for life. Cameron Bancroft, 9-month ban from all international and domestic cricket. These bans far exceeded the ICC's initial punishments and reflected the cultural impact of the scandal in Australia. The penalties extended beyond Cricket Australia. The Indian Premier League terminated Smith and Warner's $2.4 million contracts. Sponsors fled. Commonwealth Bank and breakfast cereal Weet-Bix dropped Smith, while LG and ASICS terminated their relationships with Warner and Bancroft. Though initially cleared of involvement, coach Darren Lehmann announced his resignation 4 days after the incident. Watching Smith and Bancroft's emotional press conferences had convinced him it was time for Australian cricket to make a fresh start. On the field, a demoralised Australian team suffered another crushing defeat in the final test in Johannesburg, losing by 492 runs, their second heaviest defeat by runs in Test history. But the repercussions were just beginning. Cricket Australia commissioned an independent cultural review that delivered a scathing assessment. Australian cricket had developed a toxic win-at-all-costs mentality where players were encouraged to play the mongrel and where the spirit of the game had been sacrificed on the altar of victory. The revolution that followed was seismic. CEO James Sutherland resigned after 17 years. Chairman David Peaver was forced out. Board member and former captain Mark Taylor resigned. High-performance manager Pat Howard and other executives were sacked from the Ashes. A new leadership emerged. Tim Paine, once considering retirement before his surprise recall months earlier, was confirmed as Test captain. Justin Langer, known for his principled approach to the game, was appointed head coach. Together, they faced the monumental task of rebuilding not just a team, but a cricket culture that had lost its way. For the banned players, the wilderness years had begun. Limited to playing grade cricket in Australia, they faced a long road of reflection and rehabilitation. For Australian cricket fans, many of whom felt personally betrayed, The process of rebuilding trust would take much longer than 12 months. While banned from professional cricket in Australia, Smith and Warner began their long journey back through Sydney grade cricket. Far from the glamorous stadiums and global spotlight they were accustomed to, they returned to cricket's grassroots. For Smith, turning out for Sutherland at the modest Glenn McGrath Oval was a humbling experience. Crowds that would normally number in the dozens swelled into the thousands, some supportive, others hostile. The band players were still eligible to play in overseas leagues, leading to surreal scenes of Smith and Warner competing in Canada's Global T20 League and later in the Caribbean Premier League. Though their performances were mixed, these tournaments provided crucial competitive cricket during their exile. Bancroft, serving a shorter ban, was the first to return to professional cricket, playing for Perth Scorchers in the Big Bash League on December 30th, 2018. His return was low-key, scoring just 2 runs from 3 balls, but symbolically significant. As their bans neared completion, Smith and Warner were gradually reintegrated. In March 2019, they met with the Australian squad in Dubai. Coach Justin Langer described the meeting as like 2 brothers returning home. Their formal return to Australian colours came at the 2019 Cricket World Cup in England. The reception was hostile. English crowds waved sandpaper and booed relentlessly. But both players showed impressive mental fortitude. Warner in particular excelled, finishing as the tournament's second highest run scorer. The true test came in the Ashes series that followed. In the first test at Edgbaston, facing a hostile crowd, Smith produced one of cricket's greatest comeback performances. Scoring 144 in the first innings and 142 in the second, he single-handedly dragged Australia to victory. Former England captain Michael Vaughan called it one of the great test innings. Even English fans who had booed Smith to the crease reluctantly stood to applaud his extraordinary resilience and skill. Australia would go on to retain the Ashes on English soil for the first time since 2001, with Smith amassing 774 runs at an average of 110.57 despite missing 1 test with concussion. Warner struggled, but his mere presence in the team symbolised the completion of his formal redemption. Bancroft's path back to international cricket proved more challenging. Though he returned to Sheffield Shield cricket with Western Australia, national selection remained elusive for the youngest member of the Sandpaper Trio. Beyond individual comeback, Australian cricket underwent a cultural transformation. Under Tim Paine's leadership, the team embraced a new approach built around respect for the game and its tradition. Pre-match handshakes with opponents became standard practice, and the aggressive sledging that had characterised previous eras was toned down significantly. Behind the scenes, Cricket Australia implemented all 42 recommendations from the Culture Review. A new players' pact was drafted, emphasising that winning was important but not at the expense of the game's integrity. Slowly, the Australian public began to forgive. When Smith and Warner played their first test on home soil after the ban at Brisbane in November 2019, they received standing ovation rather than jeer. The road back had been long and painful, but it demonstrated cricket's capacity for redemption. The players had paid a heavy price, served their time, and returned as changed men. For Smith in particular, his batting seemed unaffected. If anything, the ordeal had made him even more determined to let his cricket do the talking. Cricket, like life itself, is a game of redemption. From the depths of disgrace to the heights of achievement, the journey of Smith, Warner, and to a lesser extent Bancroft, reflects sport's unique power to both punish and forgive. The Sandpaper Scandal forced Australian cricket to hold a mirror to itself and confront what it had become. The culture that had produced unprecedented success had also fostered an environment where winning justified almost any means. The scandal's legacy extends far beyond the careers of 3 players. It triggered a complete reset of Australian cricket's values and priority. New leadership, new attitude, and a renewed commitment to playing the game, hard but fair, emerged from the Ashes of Cape Town. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is that cricket is more than a game. To countries like Australia, it represents national identity and value. When players wear the baggy green cap, they carry not just their own aspiration, but the hopes and pride of a nation. For all the millions of dollars now flowing through the game, for all the commercialisation and professionalism, cricket still rests on foundations built over centuries. Respect, integrity, and the nebulous but essential spirit of the game. The Sandpaper Scandal was the moment when those foundations were shaken to their core. The fact that they didn't collapse entirely is testament to cricket's resilience and its deep roots in the cultural soil of nations like Australia. Steve Smith, David Warner and Cameron Bancroft will forever be linked to cricket's darkest day. Their names will always carry the asterisk of Cape Town. But their story is not just one of disgrace, it's also one of punishment, penance and ultimate partial redemption. Cricket moved on, as it always does. New scandals emerged, new heroes rose and new villains were cast. But the memory of that yellow piece of sandpaper in Cape Town remains vivid. A cautionary tale about the pressures of elite sport, the fragility of reputation and the painful consequences of compromising integrity for advantage. Under the shadow of Table Mountain on that fateful day in March 2018, cricket lost a piece of its innocence. But in the years that followed, perhaps it found something more valuable, a renewed commitment to the principles that have sustained the game for generations. The Sandpaper Scandal wasn't just cricket's darkest day, it was also the beginning of a new dawn,